If you were to put a gun to my head and say that I could only watch Venom Let There Be Carnage, Morbius or Madam Web for the rest of my life, I would probably choose Madam Web. Welcome back to my channel, and today we are reviewing the next in Sony's rather atrocious attempts at building a superhero universe, Madam Web. The film follows paramedic Cassandra Webb, who starts gaining these clairvoyant powers and sees the future demise of these three young women who she then reluctantly ends up trying to work to save from this mysterious attacker that has a link with her past. Madam Web was honestly doomed to fail from the get-go, much like Craven is when they eventually decide to release that, because it is part of a brand of superhero films that consistently and epically seem to fail whenever they get released. And it's not like the potential isn't there for this darker, grittier take on a superhero franchise. Between the Venom films, Morbius and now this, there is a much grittier, grounded and darker tone that these films seem to adopt. And if these films really leaned into and embraced that darker and grittier and gorier take, and weren't so preoccupied with achieving a certification rating that was accessible to everyone, then I think this universe would be off to a much better start. But as it stands, Madam Web is another nail in the coffin for what could honestly be one of the worst franchises in the history of film at the moment. When I said I would rather watch this film than the other films, that mostly is thanks to the first half, which, although generic, formulaic, and a bit underwhelming, is actually just fine. I thought the kind of introduction and establishment of Cassandra Webb as this socially awkward but highly competent and very good at her job character was actually okay. It didn't feel rushed. It didn't feel bogged down by normal superhero origin story fatigue. The film actually took some time to drip feed these powers, these clairvoyant abilities into the narrative rather than just rush it through. And it actually takes a little while for this ensemble to get together with the girls she's trying to protect. And I basically thought everything up until that point was actually okay. It was nothing special by any means, but it wasn't a dire train wreck waste of a film. Her rapport with Ben Parker, played by Adam Scott, was a very believable chemistry and I think was probably the best character dynamic in the film. And you do start to miss his presence when he gets sidelined in the narrative for the second half and gets replaced with these three young girls. It was looking okay. Then Cassandra Webb decides to take on the responsibility of protecting these three women from this mysterious attacker, and that's when we take the nosedive. There is so much wrong with the second half of this film. When I said the first half of the film wasn't bogged down with superhero origin fatigue, the second half definitely is. The film takes a bit of a detour to the Peruvian rainforest, so Cassandra Webb can link up with these spiritual tribal people who her mum encountered. It enables Cassandra Webb to have revelations about her past, reframe how she sees her mum, revelations about the mysterious antagonist. On a side note, in the opening scene with her mum, these tribespeople looked like tribespeople that, they were wearing loincloths, like braiding made out of like the nature around them. It was very minimalistic and they looked very one with nature. In the scene when Cassandra Webb goes to visit these people in 2003, we only see one of them and he is just dressed like a normal human civilian. No explanation as to why this has changed. As far as we're aware, they all still live in the rainforest, but fashion has reached them apparently. But yeah, that whole narrative segment just felt really unnecessary and just ultimately ended up bogging the film down in those formulaic conventions that it just did not need. Then we've got this group ensemble of these characters who are ultimately just boring. As with all of these Sony films, the script is just a failure. It is just so dire and just offers nothing by way of compelling material for these characters to learn and grow. In fact, in every kind of group team-up film, there is a kind of team building scene. There is a moment in the finale when they all come together to contribute to the outcome. It is genuinely laughable how in Madam Web their version of that is basically having this group take turns doing CPR after getting tired for about 10 seconds. And the fact that they couldn't think of anything more compelling or more dramatically satisfying than having these three girls just taking turns pumping someone's chest. Some people need to be fired at Sony, because how you can fail 4 times in a row with a film is genuinely beyond me. In Madam Web, they are just dead weight for the most part and really supply nothing but inconvenience to Cassandra Webb. And because the script does not give them anything emotional or compelling to do or journeys to go on, everything falls flat with them. And then we have to talk about the ADR, which is when they'll bring actors back in post-production if the audio quality isn't quite up to scratch for whatever reason, and they will redub their lines to make them sound clearer, to make them more articulate, and just to make the quality overall better. And there are several moments in this film, mostly with the villain's scenes, that I noticed, where his lips are moving, but the dialogue he is saying is something completely different to what was originally recorded. And there is no attempt made to make that a believable switch. They have just overlaid his new lines over what he was previously saying, so it doesn't sync up. It is so noticeable. And it just reeks of a poor attention to detail and a minimal effort approach into making this film of a high quality. Speaking of the villain, his motives were, I initially thought, quite interesting. I quite like the idea that he becomes villainous purely through this paranoia that he's eventually going to be killed and trying to subvert that at every opportunity. But then that is all there is to him. There is nothing remotely complex nor interesting about this antagonist. And to make matters worse, he doesn't actually share any proper scenes with Cassandra Webb, so there was no real point in establishing this backstory for her where he was involved in the death of her mother, because there is no real satisfaction to their relationship. In terms of action scenes, there aren't really many, because these aren't characters with superpowers as we've come to know them in the typical sense, in terms of like physical prowess. The villain's Spider-Man, not Spider-Man suit is cool, but again, he does nothing remotely fun or cool with it. So make no mistake, this is trash. It's not as trash as the other Sony films, but it is trash nonetheless. It has a final scene that kind of teases the future of these characters. I don't think you need to be a clairvoyant to say that we're not going to see that future. So Madam Web is overall another catastrophic failure for Sony's attempt at building this grittier cinematic universe of superhero side characters. It has a half-decent tone. The darker, more grounded approach really worked in the first half, and I did quite like the slow build-up and introduction to Cassandra Webb as a character. So surprise, surprise, Madam Web was not great. If you have seen it, guys, do drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Please also consider liking and subscribing to the channel. That's always a huge help for me. And in the meantime, we will see you for the next review.